History is more than wars and violence. In fact, history has often been forged through conflicts of a different sort, when huge numbers of people banded together to fight and sacrifice for their side, without ever joining a conventional army or resorting to violence. Incredible individuals, who were not politicians or generals, led these movements. In the case of the 19th Amendment, the people who fought were mostly women. They had almost no official voice in the political process, and no armed soldiers on their side. But eventually, these women overpowered, and eventually persuaded, an American president and a majority of the country's male elected officials to back their cause. The people who fought for the Civil Rights Act were mostly African Americans, discriminated against and marginalized by the very racism they opposed. These men and women were regularly denied the vote. Often they were violently attacked. But in the end, they convinced great numbers of white Americans and the white politicians who represented them to reject the racism that once ruled their lives. In both conflicts, one side was excluded from governance and had no conventional weapons. Yet this side prevailed each time, and without shedding their opponent's blood. So what was the source of their remarkable power? Nonviolent activism. Alice Paul led the final push for the 19th Amendment. She was a Quaker woman with no access to the voting booth. Martin Luther King Jr. led the call for the Civil Rights Act. He was a Baptist minister who held no public office and couldn't drink from the same water fountains as whites. Both Paul and King were activists who inspired, mobilized, and organized vast numbers of people to unite in order to struggle and sacrifice together for their causes. Operating outside of government institutions and rejecting violent methods, women's suffrage and the civil rights movement used nonviolent resistance to transform their people's weakness into strength and change the course of history. Nonviolent activism isn't just an American phenomenon. Perhaps the greatest nonviolent struggle of all, the Indian independence movement, led by Mohandas K. Gandhi, ended nearly 200 years of British colonial rule and brought freedom to 300 million people without a bloody war of independence. Nonviolent struggles also helped overthrow totalitarian regimes shaped by the Soviet Union, one of the largest, most powerful, and most repressive countries ever. Many times in the past, nonviolent resistance has prevailed, shifting the course of history as much as a war, without firing a single shot. So maybe we've been getting our history wrong, or at least very incomplete. In an age when armies are stronger than ever before, when guns seem to be everywhere, how can people defeat their adversaries without resorting to violence themselves? The best way to answer these questions is by telling the stories of some of the most incredible, inspiring nonviolent struggles of the last 100 years. Which isn't to say that nonviolent resistance is a new phenomenon. Not at all. In fact, its history goes back many centuries and includes even the biblical Jesus among its innumerable practitioners. But this simple method of pursuing justice has seen a remarkable resurgence over the last century. And as we'll see, though these movements have much in common, each conflict is unique and teaches us something new about how and why nonviolent action works. Yet all these stories do have one thing in common: nonviolent activists who have chosen to fight against injustice and the people behind it. You might think that someone who practices nonviolence must hate conflict, but the exact opposite is true. Nonviolent activists are fighters who directly challenge their opponents. Only the wars they wage look a lot different than the ones that take place on a military battlefield. I wrote this book because I believe that nonviolence, even more effective than it is peaceful, is a better way to fight. Indeed, it may well be the best way to fix our broken world. I hope you'll agree and be inspired to join those already fighting for change, non-violently.